It has been a while, hasn't it? I have not played that much From the Depths in a long time. I've been playing quite a bit of Noita, which I've been enjoying a lot, but my computer is a little bit of a potato, so I can't really record Noita content that well. I'm probably going to be building a new computer in the coming months, so maybe I'll be able to fix that, and hopefully that'll improve my ability to record From the Depths as well, which I'd like to play a bit more now. And I've been playing a lot of Magic the Gathering, although mostly on my commutes to and from work. So the change that I'm interested in looking at now, other than plasma cannons, is the changes to the ramming behavior. Now, there's direct for legacy reasons, but then there's APN and predictive guidance. I have this using APN because that's what my breadboard was doing. The turn rate, I just played with that a bit. I've only been toying with this for about 30 minutes, so I'm pretty sure this is a good setting for this craft, but I do not know exactly what it does. I think it's the rate for the augmented portion of the APN, the second derivative, and I think you cannot adjust the proportional navigation rate except through the PID, but I am not sure. So previously, since this used a breadboard, it had an empty maneuver. Now it has ship or tank, and the breadboard is still controlling hover and pitch control. The reason for that is there's no altitude offset for this behavior, and this needs to pass over the enemy vehicle. So if I look at my breadboards, I am still running a thrust vectoring breadboard because this vehicle is almost completely unmanageable without thrust vectoring, since it's a really, really heavy brick and it's difficult to ram with. And that's why I'm using it for this test, because if you can get this thing to ram the enemy, then you've done a good job. So this used to have a bunch of stuff for APN, but I ripped out all of the outputs that I could control with the new AI, and then got rid of everything that didn't have its output connected, so I was just left with this, which controls the sword and controls pitch and hover. The pitch and hover are really, well, the pitch is really constant angle, and the rest is the hover's direct guidance. So this will still not be good at hitting enemy vehicles. I would really like an altitude offset on the ramming behavior, which would probably give this a little bit more of a fair game at ramming enemies. Or at ramming airborne enemies, at least. So let's try a few enemy vehicles, and we'll start with some that are very reasonable, but somewhat tricky to ram. So the Braveheart's one of them. It's not a huge craft, which increases the difficulty a little bit, and it's fairly maneuverable. Now, at a top speed of 25 meters per second, it's not the fastest. So with our top speed, we should be able to intercept it pretty easily. The APN is doing a really good job of compensating for the enemy's acceleration and our own inertia. And there we go, dead center through the middle, and got a clean cut. Sometimes it doesn't because of the frame rate in From the Depths, but in this case, we cut it straight through. I've done that a few times with the Braveheart. Don't always cut it cleanly in half, sometimes a block is left, but it always hits it dead center. Now let's try the Kitakami. The Kitakami is faster, but I think is a little bit less maneuverable. Not that it matters all that much. So we can see ourselves adjusting a little bit there. Ooh, this is more of a head-on collision than I usually aim for. This is going to be much more difficult. But still a very good hit. A hair off center, but very, very close, and that was still enough for a kill. I also have my weapon system offline currently so that we're not lasering enemies to death. These small vehicles can die very quickly from this laser system if they don't smoke up, and I really only want this to be about ramming. I also have God mode on because this isn't about how this vehicle performs, it's about how the AI performs. And this vehicle's tanky, but sometimes things happen, especially because almost everything in this vehicle is a critical point of failure. There's really almost no redundancy. I sort of had to build it that way, even though it's not the greatest. So let's check another thing out. Now, for this vehicle, I did have some behavior in the breadboard that when it hit an enemy vehicle, when it actually made contact, it would stop trying to maneuver, and it would just try to cut in a perfectly straight line, given however it hit. That behavior's gone now, so we'll have to see if that affects our ability to cut through. However, this is doing a fantastic job of keeping itself on target and going straight through the center, better than the breadboard was able to do. It got low health before we even finished cutting all the way through, but this kept on track all the way through the vehicle. A bit of a curve, but that's actually very good performance. I'm really happy with that. And I'm going to do the same test again, except on an even nastier vehicle. Now, actually, with my previous breadboard, I was having trouble even getting a direct hit on the Stronghold 100% of the time. And by direct hit, I mean straight through the center. It would always hit the Stronghold, it's just, it wouldn't always hit it the way I want. Its missiles are actually so big, I'm worried about them knocking us off course if they hit. The same with the cram cannons, although to a lesser extent. So now, well, we're basically on rails. We're gonna hit the center within a few meters. So it's just a question of whether or not we can cut through straight. Which, we actually hit 2 straight, didn't we? Because now we're fetched up on them. I should probably make this thing, when I say this thing, I mean this thing spin a little bit so this doesn't happen. Because now we're just pushing them, and that's really not what I want. This is never really a problem before because it wasn't able to keep this dead center of a cut through. And now we're twisting a little bit, but that's because we came to a dead stop. It cut straight through all the way to the Citadel where it physically couldn't. If this vehicle had a bigger sword on it, which, I mean, I could put in without much more expense. The only reason this is this length is because I wanted it when it, low health, okay. So I wanted it so that when it retracts, when there's no enemy around, that the sword actually folded up into the craft. If I didn't have that restriction, I would make the sword a bit longer, and then I'd have better luck cutting through in a straight line for enemies like that. But the failure there was definitely for my craft. I think the AI would have actually kept it on course, dead center, all the way through the enemy vehicle from one side to the other. So definitely fantastic results. I don't really think there's much of a reason to make a breadboard AI for ramming anymore. I do think some amount of breadboarding is almost mandatory, because if you do something like a small nuke, you'll want it to change behaviors on the way in so it can stay high altitude and avoiding. Then when it gets near, actually turn on whatever it needs to hit with. But relatively minor, not a huge amount of work like it is currently. Just, again, would love to have a little bit of altitude adjustment so that you can pass over the enemy, or maybe under the enemy if you're making a submarine. And that's pretty much it. Now, I did mention a little bit that I had trouble getting this to hit the Stronghold dead on, and to some extent that's not wrong, but it's also not exactly right either. The reason was that if I turned up the second derivative, the augmented proportion of the control, high enough to reliably hit the enemy, I would have issues with my craft getting really twitchy, and that was because my vehicle was relying on the position of the enemy vehicle, which here I had automatic detection off to demonstrate that this was working with just the craft's own sensors. So when I was using the breadboard, I could get it to work fine with automatic detection at 1, but either would be very twitchy with it off, or would not have the second derivative gain high enough. And the reason was because the noise from the trackers, even though I had a ton of trackers and sensors and was really trying to get this thing's range finding precise, the noise was just too high, and it was causing the second derivative to just freak out. The second derivative was not as usable as it should have been. I could have put some signal processing on it to try to, and I don't mean like any of this in-game signal processing, I mean like actually breadboard signal processing with logic, to try to make it more usable. I have a suspicion that the AI does not do that sort of thing. My suspicion is that the AI just straight up cheats and just takes the exact enemy position as far as trying to figure out the second derivative processing and maybe even some of the proportional navigation processing. Now, I could experiment with this and get it to be more than just a suspicion by messing around with the visibility of the enemy vehicle, but that's just my conspiracy theory, is that it's impossible to make a breadboard that's as good as this AI because I think the AI cheats. Not that I really have a problem with it, I think it's basically required for the second derivative to work properly. Well, anyway, a short video. Next ones will probably be a bit longer if I go into plasma cannons. And then if I do some more building stuff, those will probably be longer as well. But just wanted to do a quick one to make my first video in, it's like almost a year now, I think. So I hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll see you in the future.